So technologists are not typically good at they're usually good at technology. One of the areas they're very deficient is really on the leadership skills, and building these skills is super critical in leading remote teams. So right processes and tools, and going over quarterly and biannual goals and review processes as well as metrics is going to be very, very critical. You know, with respect to remote learning process, small chunks of learning spaced out over a period of time is also very, very good. Having that, reinforces memory networks as learners retrieve the material over and over again. So that's really good. Virtual persuasion processes also, research shows that an estimated approximately 55% of an effective and persuasive presentation is actually in nonverbal communication, which you typically don't get the privilege of doing when you are working in a remote environment. So how do you, kind of replicate that? So, know your audience in being able to establish virtual persuasion. You need to understand your audience first. You can usually gauge how the audience is reacting to your message by seeing how many are distracted and the ones that are wandering around, or you could hear them typing on this while you're speaking. So make sure you have make sure you have the videos turned on. That's very important. Ask questions. So a lot of confirming and open-ended questions are really good practice. Keep your message very short. Try no more than 30 minutes meetings. Keep them short. And if they have any objections and questions, make sure you address them all. It's very critical to be able to address their question. Even if you don't have the answer now, follow up and follow through. If you tell them, I'll address this question later on. So that some of these processes are really good. Your quarterly goals, your metrics, virtual persuasion process, remote learning process, all these processes need to be all in cadence and consistent to be very effective. Over to you, FK.
Thank you. And so basically, the other thing around the processes is, Jira Workflow for all tasks, right? So we want to make sure that when you're following a process, right, those workflows are defined, right? If you don't do that, and then basically once the process breaks, then it's going to be a nightmare, right? There's a very good book that I read, the Phoenix Project, right? And if I'd highly recommend reading that book, right? So it talks about the importance of the processes, right? So you can still do a lot of things with a limited number of resources, right? As long as you have a process. And one of the things that talked about in that book is also your process may not be perfect, right? So you may want to improve your process over a period of time, but having a process in place and people adhering to it and complying to that process is critical, right? So it could have some deficiencies, maybe some leakages, like Ed talked about earlier, productivity leakages, but that's okay. As long as you have some processes, you'll come back and maybe you'll tweak it. For example, within technology, you have a process with code reviews, right? Your design reviews and architecture reviews, right? So you make sure that, again, this also ties back to Cadence, to make sure that, architecture reviews are happening, right? Maybe every week, right? If you, or maybe once a month or something like that. Design reviews are happening, right? If there is a new change, then you want to make sure your design reviews are happening. Code reviews are always happening, right? So these are the processes you want to instill in every single resource, developers, execution team members, and making sure that they're not breaking that process. Role-based permissions, right? So a lot of people basically try to, fiddle around with a lot of things, right? So having a process to give the right access and permission to the right resource is very important, right? So if somebody needs an access, you should have a process saying, okay, well, you need to make sure you get the proper approvals before we give you right roles and permissions. So having that process in place is equally important. Last one is the deployment process, right? So, you know, if you're in the software industry and you are doing a lot of deployments, making sure that you have a proper deployment process in place. When are you gonna, what time you're gonna do the deployments, right? Whether you have a backup process in place or not, right? The cadence, and then which team members are needed, right? And they should be always available. Having that checklist and having that, you know, approval process in place is very important when you're doing the deployment. Again, this would only help you to make sure that you can actually follow through all the items, all the deliveries on time and with quality. If you don't follow and adhere to the processes, then you may probably run into issues very frequently, right? So processes are, again, very, very important at adhering. And again, the last thing is to have some process in place, even though it may have some leakages, but having those processes in place and adhering and complying to those is very important, rather than having 100%, you know, non-leakage, you know, non-leak process.